T. Higgins and Jamar Chase just re-signed. We just finished free agency. It started with the bang, ended with a whimper. It's me, it's the Podfather, and you're right here on the Fast Draft Pod. Jamar Chase signs a 4-year, $164 million deal. T. Higgins signs a 4-year, $116 million deal. They re-signed Mike Gesicki, which no one cared about 2 weeks ago. Cincinnati seems to be keeping the band together. And by the band, I mean only the offense. This is all good, right, Matt? This is all good. All good.
This is what we want to see, man. Interesting conversation about T. Higgins. Was he a winner? Was he a loser from free agency? On Twitter X, I posted fantasy_mansion is my handle there. I posted my top 10 winners. Big thread. It's getting a lot of engagement, so check it out. I left T. Higgins off my list because had he signed somewhere else, he could have gone to the Patriots or some other team that might have traded for him. Or next year, had he just played out the franchise tag, he would have gone on and potentially been an alpha somewhere else and had a bigger target share, career high target share. So that would have been great. However, whatever offense he ended up going to would not have been as great. So it's like, do you want the target share or do you want the highest value targets, the most red zone opportunities possible from the offense that you're operating in, even if you're going to be the beta? The problem with T. Higgins and why I think this is the right move for him professionally is that he's not a true alpha. He's never going to be a true alpha. He wasn't before Jamar Chase and he wasn't after Jamar Chase. He's I'm going to go out and I'm going to get 110 targets and I'm going to put up a healthy yards per reception. I'm going to miss a bunch of games with injury. This is what I am. And I'm going to be a red zone weapon, especially for a team that scores a lot of points. And for the foreseeable future, we know that the Bengals are spending a lot of money on their offense, which necessarily means they can't spend money on their defense. And they might have to trade valuable pieces and let valuable pieces go, like Jesse Bates, in order to afford all these offensive pieces. So this is very good news for Jamar Chase, very good news for Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow, a big winner from NFL Free Agency. He probably should have made my top 10 list over, say, Kenneth Gainwell. Oh well. Check it out. You'll have to go to Twitter X and evaluate my top 10 list, and then you can put in the comments and reply and say, "Hey, you left out Joe Burrow, dude. You got C.J. Stroud on there. You got Justin Fields on there. What about Joe Burrow? Whoops. Yeah, Joe Burrow getting T. Higgins. That was a win." And I will not just say it's 50-50. It's a total push on T. Higgins that, okay, he could have gone somewhere else to be an alpha, but now he's a higher volume beta on a top scoring offense. I will say he was a winner. He was officially a winner to maintain his continuity, to be in a place where he was just a double-digit touchdown scorer, even though he didn't play 17 games. It's a good situation to be in. He stays there. It's a win.
Yeah, and then, we're talking fantasy stacks here, essentially, like winners, losers, free agency. I think T. Higgins is the easiest stack to get in almost any format that you're in right now. Like, let's say for Fast Draft ADP, Flex 4, he's going 22 right now. Granted, we don't have quarterbacks on there, but to me, that's a good value. And here is my devil's advocate argument for T. Higgins, why we shouldn't just call him maybe a beta or whatever we want to say. He was basically wide receiver 2 in points per game and when he was healthy. It's always been a health issue with him, not earning targets, not volume, because like you said, and especially we talked about a little bit before show, Cincinnati's garbage, guys. If you have 2 hands, 2 legs, and you can run at least a 5.2, you probably qualify for the Bengals. You can go over there right now, do some Mark Wahlberg shit, try out for that team, and go play cornerback. What's the number you gave me? 434 points against, only behind the Browns, who are barely a team. I think there's a lot of room here for T. Higgins, even on sleeper. I'm in my own right now, just like a dynasty draft, depending on what format you're in. He went in the 4th round. That might be a little rich for me. It's to me, it's the health thing on here. Would you feel comfortable as T. Higgins as your wide receiver 1 on any team, like no matter what format, fast draft?
Well, looking at points against, 434 points against for Cincinnati. That was the same as Cleveland, the same as Las Vegas, the same as Jacksonville. Really, only Tennessee in the AFC allowed more points. And then in the NFC, it was the Cowboys allowed more points, Carolina allowed more points. But this is clearly a team that has, in particular, a decimated secondary, and they're not backfilling this talent. Like you said, anyone can go play corner or safety for the Cincinnati Bengals. And especially if you're a pass funnel defense, that is the ideal situation for the receiving options and assets on the offensive side. So if you're building a stack on any platform, if you're trying to do quarterback wide receiver stacks, multiple stacks, like, quarterback with multiple receivers or a quarterback with a receiver and a tight end, if you want to multi-stack, you should be targeting teams that have a below average secondary to ensure that the defenses are always being challenged, and that the teams that the Bengals in this case are facing are incentivized to throw, and throwing is more efficient than running in the NFL, in spite of what the NFL learned from Saquon Barkley's, resurgence last year. I think there's some wrong lessons learned there, and we're going to see that in the NFL draft. The overdrafting of Ashton Genty, we'll see that. He'll go in the top 10 where he should not go, but it's the
way she goes.
The pendulum has swung back. It's fine. This is what it is. We know what's happening. So you love that. That's why you love the situation for Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. It's the sexiest double stack out there in all of best ball. However, with the Flex 4 game, there's no quarterback. And because there's no quarterback, you want to stay away from negative correlation wherever you can. So it is likely suboptimal to draft both Chase and Higgins. Typically, in the Flex 4 game where you're just drafting 6 guys in the top 4 into your lineup every week, you're looking for an option that you think can exceed expectations in that passing game and put your chips there. So you might think that the T. Higgins ADP is a better value than the Jamar Chase ADP, which is the 101, right? So you're probably, if that's the case, because you're only going to get Chase in 1 out of 10 drafts because there's 10 teams per draft on Fast Draft. So you're only going to get Jamar Chase once every 10 drafts anyway. You might as well just leave him posted up in the 101 chair. The thing is, if you set your rankings and move either Bijan or Saquon to the 101, you're likely not going to get any Jamar Chase. And because you likely want some exposure to Jamar Chase, you probably are going to want to keep Jamar Chase in the 101 spot when you're setting your rankings. Or if you're going to be bidding like a turbo draft where it's going to draft automatically for you, maybe you could adjust and put Bijan or Saquon up there, but then make sure you're in some drafts where you're physically live drafting. And when you do get the 101, just get a little bit of exposure. You don't want zero Jamar Chase. No one wants to go into the season with zero Jamar Chase. But I could absolutely see a lot of savvy fast draft drafters having 2 to 3 times as much T. Higgins as they do Jamar Chase.
Yeah, I mean he's 22 right now in our ADP. So like realistically, like you said, if you're 101, and guys, this is like keep it simple, stupid, in any format, whatever. If you have a chance to get Jamar Chase, probably click the button. His ADP is so high right now. No matter what kind of tournament that you're in, take that opportunity just for your diversity. But let's say right now, like you said, I love what you said, Saquon Barkley, Bijan, something like that. Jahmyr Gibbs even, depending on where you're drafting from. And you go
now why is that? I just was talking to a buddy last night, and he's starting to get in the flex 4 mindset. And he's like, oh, I'm setting my rankings for flex 4. Here's what I'm thinking. And we look back, and you can go back in the app. You can go back and look at, you can click on flex 4, and you can go back and look at the completed tournaments. And you go back to last year, and you can see who was at the top of the standings. That team drafted Jamar Chase in the first round. And then Saquon, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Alvin Kamara. It was mostly running backs. And the winning builds, the top 10 builds last year, were predominantly running backs. So you might just use that information and work backwards and say, hey, I want to have predominantly running backs on this team. And if you could set it up where you have the exact same build in terms of position allocation per round as a lot of the winning teams did last year, where your one wide receiver is a first rounder, and then you're just pounding running back after that. But you still want to have some teams with a Bijan, with a Jahmyr Gibbs. And, I think that in his first draft, my buddy of mine, he drafted a Bijan in the first round, and he just ended up with 6 running backs. So
that's a
the
high
lesson from
build.
last year.
That's a high T build.
Yeah. The lesson from last year is that running backs have a little more, as we've learned with LaDainian Tomlinson and Christian McCaffrey over the years. The highest end running backs have the most upside because wide receivers cannot come close to competing with their number of touches.
Yep.
And
the high leverage touches in the red zone is a big thing. Yep.
Yeah, there's no way that a wide receiver is going to be able to compete with a running back in terms of the greatest touchdown seasons of all time. Those are all running backs, and that will continue to be the case. And so knowing that in this particular format, even though it's full PPR, and that's the difference between like a traditional best ball and the flex 4 game, is some of these other best ball formats, they're half PPR. But they start 3 receivers. Like Underdog is start 3 receivers, half PPR. So the receivers are pushed up because there's a third receiver entering your lineup, but then they're pushed down slightly because it's half PPR. In this format, Flex 4, it's full PPR, but there's no position restrictions or allocations. So you're just looking at who has the most fantasy point scoring potential, period.
Upside. Yep.
And in general, a bell cow running back, when you go back through time, has a little more point scoring potential than even the alpha-iest alpha receiver.
So, like, the argument here is like you're selling me is it's like pretty much in the first round, these alpha, and especially right now with our landscape, I'm not going to count my chickens before they've hatched with these running backs. We already see Najee go to the Chargers. We've already seen Miles Sanders is still getting a job here. It's already like we love Najee Harris here, but I'm just saying that the jobs are drying up. So if I could get Saquon, Bijan, I think Saquon's a tier. There's not a big difference between Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson to me. No. Devon Achane. Yeah, like some of these people here. That's like one.
Well, I think there's a difference. I think that's the tier break to me is after Gibbs. I think that's when a lot of people are considering wide receiver. They're considering Puka. They're considering Neighbors. They're considering Amon-Ra St. Brown.
St. Brown, especially in Brian Thomas Jr. is hot right now.
Yeah, so I could absolutely see builds just like last year, winning builds where the first round pick was Amon-Ra St. Brown or Brian Thomas, and then it was 5 running backs. I could absolutely see that.
So, okay, fair. So let's say you get Jahmyr Gibbs. That's when right after you get Jahmyr Gibbs, you're probably, like you're saying, you're not going to get Neighbors. You're not going to get BTJ. You're not going to get Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's when I'm taking someone like T. Higgins because T. Higgins is very running backy compared to a lot of these wide receivers. And granted, we're full PPR, so that's a little bit different. But I just like the upside because when he's out there, he gets touchdowns. You want to talk about high leverage touches that could compete with running backs? T. Higgins is the type of guy that I want. So pretty like Jamar Chase as a 1-on-1 seems a little expensive comparatively and especially no matter 1 QB flex 4, if running back might be higher upside. Running back's a new tight end where like you're better off getting Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, these high end guys early for that positional upside and then fading all the rest later. So like I'd rather just have these beefy boys like Barkley and stuff. Do you care about Mike Gesicki at all?
No. What?
Okay, I had to ask. Legally I have to ask about Mike Gesicki.
No, Mike Gesicki's athletic, he is, but I mean, I think we saw his absolute ceiling last year. Mm-hmm. We probably going to get a few more games, hopefully, from T. Higgins, and that just means less opportunities for Mike Gesicki. Let's look back at what he did last year. He was tight end 13, which is better than I remembered. Like 665 receiving yards, nice little 10 yards per reception. He has probably could get more touchdown equity, only 2 touchdowns on 83 targets. So that's the lower end of the distribution. So yeah, you could absolutely see him finishing a bit higher in the fantasy points per game. So even though he was tight end 13, because he played all 17 games, he was actually only tight end 17 in fantasy points per game. So I could absolutely see him in points per game getting up to 10.0 fantasy points per game, being like the tight end 12, 13 on a per game basis, and being a nice late round option in a lot of leagues if you'd like. But no one I'm excited about, no one that I'm targeting as a sleeper, and certainly no one that people are drafting on Fast Draft.
Well, when we talk about Mike Gesicki, it's probably a good time to stop talking about the Bengals. Actually, no, we got one more. Chase Brown here. Out of hand. I think we went on a pod before. Like his ADP's out of hand a little bit right now, right? Like,
well, right. I mean, on fastdraft.app, if you scroll to the bottom, there's a tournament data section on fastdraft.app, and you can see the ADPs. You can see where Chase Brown is being drafted. He's at pick 25.
Yep.
So he's adjacent to Josh Jacobs.
Ahead of Breece Hall.
And one ahead of Breece Hall. And that is just too expensive. I understand right now in these early drafts, you want to leverage uncertainty. And the way you leverage uncertainty in the month of March in any fantasy format is you want to find the receivers that have hidden asymmetric upside or the running backs that have hidden asymmetric upside. There's no hidden asymmetric upside for Chase Brown. That was all last year. The hidden asymmetric upside was Chase Brown around 10. Now Chase Brown at the 2-3 turn isn't interesting to me because what could happen is they go out and they draft a big bruiser, a guy that can win between the tackles, DJ Giddens, so many different running backs that are going to cannibalize touches from him. So the only news that he can receive if he was still getting a newspaper at his front door would be bad news, right? Yep. It's all downside in terms of the asymmetry with Chase Brown because there is asymmetry. Like with Josh Jacobs, there's no asymmetry. Okay, we know what Josh Jacobs is, and we know what Josh Jacobs is likely to do this year. And Josh Jacobs at pick 24 is an absolutely fine value. I would take him over T. Higgins. I would take him over Bucky Irving, Kyron Williams, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Ladd McConkey. I would rather have Josh Jacobs in this format. Absolutely.
In this format, I get.
Absolutely. No, Josh Jacobs is. I mean, you want some Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey's exciting. Absolutely, you want some Ladd McConkey. But Josh Jacobs is about as solid as it gets. And like I said, he was part of the winning roster build last year. So I think Josh Jacobs is a tier above the Bucky Irving, Chase Brown, Kyron Williams tier. And Chase Brown is being drafted currently in all formats at his absolute maximum because the only thing that can happen is they bring in running back touch competition, which they will because they have nothing. They have the Bengals perceive running back as a weakness. You have to understand that. They perceive their secondary as a weakness, and they perceive their backfield as a weakness. So when they go into the draft, the coaches are going to be collaborating with the general manager in the front office, and they're going to be talking about their need areas And just know before you draft Chase Brown, know the Bengals perceive running back as a need area. And this is the deepest talent pool at running back we've ever seen. So when you put those two things together, drafting Chase Brown in early drafts, pre-draft, is very dangerous.
I agree 1,000%. You could not be any more correct. And like I said, anywhere, I think Chase Brown has gotten out of hand. And that is a good... we're going to end on a hot take, guys. Stop drafting Chase Brown so highly. And if you like hot takes like that, hit that like and subscribe button. We will be a weekly pod right here, as well as we'll give you some other videos, some shorts, tons of content. And again, we have the wonderful Fast Draft app for you. You can use my code Jagger, you can use code FAST, and we will match deposit for you. We've got our Origins tournament that you want to get in before the draft, guys. Get in on these rookies. If you know rookies, get in on that tournament. It's free money right now. Free money right now. And if you're listening to me, especially Theo, we will get you on top of all that rookie content coming up. So hit the like, subscribe from the audio, help us feed our families, leave us a comment and a nice 5-star review. Now, let us go to the Jets. Justin Fields is back, baby. By back, it's just how long. And I'm going to start out with another hot take here. Is Justin Fields the best quarterback that Garrett Wilson's ever played with at this point?
Sure.
I mean, you really got to think about it. Like, I'm not saying Justin Fields is great, but I'm saying he's the best quarterback that Garrett Wilson has had.
Well, I mean Garrett Wilson has not been afforded catchable passes.
Ever.
Because he had Zach Wilson, and we know Zach Wilson was Mike White his quarterback at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in his rookie year. You go back through time, you think about all the quarterbacks that Garrett Wilson has had. None of them have been accurate throwers of the football to Garrett Wilson. Maybe last year, Aaron Rodgers' catchable pass rate to Devontae Adams was perfectly reasonable, but not when he was targeting Garrett Wilson. It's just been a very unlucky year and an unlucky career for Garrett Wilson. I mean, all Garrett Wilson does is average 156 targets per season.
That's it.
That's one of the most successful target earners in the history of football through 3 seasons. But he's been criminally mistargeted by those quarterbacks to the tune of 776 unrealized air yards per season. And then even last year with Aaron Rodgers, his catchable pass rate was only 63.9%. That ranked number 92 in the NFL. So a lot of people were saying, Jagger, this is a big upgrade. This is great news. Aaron Rodgers coming to New York. And then Garrett Wilson was like, is it? Because I didn't feel it. You might say that it's true. You're saying that it's warm outside. I went outside and I had to go get a jacket on. I'm sorry. It's not what you think it is. So
yeah, I mean,
this is going to be good news. Anything is better than this. Anything is better than what he's had. And Justin Fields was the starting quarterback in a season where DJ Moore went over 1,300 yards. And
best season of his career.
Clearly his best fantasy season of his career was with Justin Fields in a very similar circumstance where DJ Moore was all they had. And Justin Fields locked in on him. And what we know is that Garrett Wilson gets separation and can command targets. And this is the perfect setup where we have a quarterback that locks in on his number one and Garrett Wilson who knows he's going to be locked in on and will get that separation even against alpha cornerbacks. It is perfect. This is the perfect match. For this reason, I had Garrett Wilson as my number 3 big winner from NFL Free Agency.
Yeah, easily. And one thing that we also got to consider, it's not just Aaron Rodgers. It is the clown show that surrounds Aaron Rodgers that came in there. It's the Nathaniel Hackett offense. They had some of the most ancient numbers when you think about how their offense operated. They are one of the slowest paced offenses. They had some of the least amount of motion. Now Aaron Glenn brings over the passing game coordinator from the Lions, And you have to be a little bit excited. Does that mean that he's Ben Johnson? No. But at least he's been in the building. Maybe some of those Ben Johnson, juju, some of that juice kind of rubbed off on him. And we can get some modern concepts. And we saw what they've done for Jared Goff. So you really have to be excited for Justin Fields. And then by extension, the rest of that offense. Because we're forgetting about Breece Hall right now. Garrett Wilson, I mean, I think he's a better wide receiver in a vacuum. And I'm saying that Amon-Ra St. Brown is very good, but I mean, if I'm an NFL team, I'm taking Garrett Wilson before I take Amon-Ra St. Brown. If I'm doing like a fantasy draft, NFL team, and we're redrafting, I'm taking Garrett Wilson. You have to be excited about that target share if what we've seen from Amon-Ra St. Brown can translate over, and that's when they had nobody. J-Mo was suspended gambling, doing some wild shit. Sam Laporta wasn't drafted yet, and they still had good numbers from Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm all in on Garrett Wilson. Arguably, we talked about T. Higgins. He's ranked 22 on Fast Draft right now. Garrett Wilson's 33. You can get 2 running backs, folks. You can get Chuba Hubbard or someone like that, and a beefy boy like Saquon Barkley, and then turn around and get one little dip at wide receiver and get Garrett Wilson here.
Yeah, if you were trying to do one of these one receiver builds, I wouldn't hate Garrett Wilson. Absolutely. In round 4, Garrett Wilson. I mean, not for long. I think that, this podcast is going to come out and, then maybe he'll be, late round 3, more understandable that you would be drafting Garrett Wilson over Mike Evans, Garrett Wilson over Chuba Hubbard, Garrett Wilson over Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Like, someone explain this to me. Jaxon Smith-Njigba and Garrett Wilson are in similar situations, but Garrett Wilson was a bigger, more explosive version of Jaxon Smith-Njigba at Ohio State. And now we have Garrett Wilson, who has a 3-year track record of being a big-time target earner versus Jaxon Smith-Njigba doing it for 1 season, predominantly out of the slot. I mean, it's not like this Sam Darnold's not this huge quarterback upgrade, right? It's the quarterback is a wash, and Garrett Wilson is just a more dynamic player and has a much more stable, longer track record of commanding targets. So that would be the starting point for me. Where I'm drafting Garrett Wilson would be over Jaxon Smith-Njigba.
Easily. And I just saw a draft where JSN went 1 pick ahead of Garrett Wilson. It's going to be fun to revisit that ahead of time, because I agree with you. Especially, I agree with your comment about these are right now prices. The price of the brick's going up, guys. Price of that brick's going to go up real quick, especially with this JSN above Garrett Wilson nonsense. Like, what are we doing at this point? This draft happened today. This was a real life draft. And actually, it's one of our boys. I'm not going to call him out, but I will call him out in a group chat. I'm like, homie, what are you doing? Sam Darnold, who I am a Sam Darnold sympathizer. At best, it's a lateral move from Geno Smith. At best, it's a lateral move.
Yeah, we'll see.
And then you got Cooper Kupp, who is a redundancy. And is it going to be death by 1,000 slot cuts on here on this team? Very questionable there on there. And I think this is a good segue to move on from the Jets, because, again, I think Breece Hall right now is ahead or behind Chase Brown. That should be flipped, especially now with Justin Fields in town. I know some people, it's like, well, he's going to steal touchdowns. I mean, I think Saquon was fine with the rushing quarterback, so I think that Breece Hall will be good. You want the Jets right now, want to buy the dip, but the Seahawks right now, I don't want any part of this. I don't want Stacks. What is Kenneth Walker now?
Well, Cooper Kupp is dust. Okay.
Yeah. He's not real.
I love putting in a guy like Jaxon Smith-Njigba as one of my big winners. Like, I had Jaxon Smith-Njigba in my top 10 big winners from NFL free agency, because how could he not be? Mm-hmm. I mean, how could he not? I mean, when you have all those vacated targets, you have 182 vacated targets between Lockett and Metcalf. So, of course, JSN is a big winner, and the addition of Cooper Kupp doesn't change that. Cooper Kupp's average target depth has declined from like 10 to 9 to 8 to like sub 8. It's just been he is clearly at the very end, when you go and you look at the Cooper Kupp lower body injury history, go to Player Profiler, look at the injury track record, it is just sad. It's just a foot, an ankle, a foot. He can't push off with any kind of explosiveness. He didn't have explosiveness to begin with. I think a 10th percentile burst score. But now, after all these injuries, I mean, he is a shell of his former self. If anything, if he's playing some slot, that's going to bump JSN out to play a little more in the Z position, which is interesting, where JSN did have 19 deep targets last year. So of all the receivers that were able to be, say, top 25 in slot snaps, he was near the top in deep targets. He was there with Devontae Adams, Jamar Chase, and Drake London were the only wide receivers that committed more deep targets than JSN, who played significant snaps out of the slot.
You're kind of selling him to me. It's not like I was anti-JSN, but I felt like his ADP was getting a little high there. So let's just play a little bit of this or that then with JSN.
I mean, yeah, I like them both, but I still would rather have Wilson.
Well, for sure
right.
On that.
I mean, I like them both, but like Wilson, again, per my big Twitter X thread, Wilson was a bigger winner than JSN.
Well, let's say someone in our ADP is going back to back. James Cook's going right after JSN. Would you rather have James Cook, who some think he might have reached his ceiling last season, or would you rather have JSN?
Oh, man. In this particular situation, I'm going to go James Cook just because the history in the Flex 4 game is the running backs are
supreme,
a better bet on average at any given ADP than wide receivers. So that's just one of those stick to the process. However, the Bills are going to be looking to upgrade on Ty Johnson, and they are accidentally going to upgrade on James Cook in the process.
It's not hard. It's
not hard. No, but that's what's going to happen, though. That's what's going to happen to a James Cook. He's susceptible to that. There's a bunch of these running backs that are going to be susceptible to this where, I thought I was safe. I had not only myself, who's been scoring a lot of fantasy points per game, and I've been a big asset in fantasy, but I also have this other guy, Ray Davis, behind me. There's plenty of protection from the draft here, but not so fast because, again, the team is still looking for a running back 3. They bring in someone like an RJ Harvey, who's actually just better than Ray Davis, and maybe fast. Better than James Cook, and it's like, whoops.
I think RJ Harvey is who James Cook, like who we think James Cook is, and I'm not sleeping on James Cook, but I mean, his athletic scores were not that good coming out. So imagine someone with good athleticism that comes in there. So I like that.
He's really benefiting. James Cook, the fragility around James Cook's projection year to year is that he benefits significantly from having Josh Allen in that offense. That teams have to commit an extra defender to Josh Allen. He's benefiting from that Alfred Morris corollary where he's just a more efficient player because of Josh Allen. And any running back you put back there is going to put up numbers. And the fantasy gamers that are looking at the fantasy production, it's not as easy to process as the coaches, for example, who just happen to see James Cook every day, and they're going and they're poring over the film every day, and they're saying, he missed a lane here, or we left production on the field here. Most fantasy gamers are not going to be going, and even if they are, they're like, yeah, we understand he's a flawed player, but he's on the Bills. Well, okay. He just understand that this is a largely situation-based fantasy asset, and those are just a little more fragile than someone like a Jonathan Taylor who is just doing it on his own. He is putting up production because of his greatness is the reason dope. For the production. It's not that he found himself in an incredible situation. It's like Chuba Hubbard, right? Chuba Hubbard, say what you want about him. he deserved every yard and fantasy point he delivered last year. He did that. That was him. That wasn't like he was in a great situation.
That's why I wasn't going to this or that Hugh Chuba Hubbard. I'm like, it's Chuba. Like, I've never been so more in on a player than I am on Chuba Hubbard, but that's a whole other conversation. I could have a whole FPV on the greatness of Chuba Hubbard and how much of an idiot I've been over 2 seasons, why I haven't been buying him everywhere. But to keep it on the Seahawks, Kenneth Walker here. Right now, he's 40 in our ADP. He seems like a wild card because objectively there's a like to like about this player, but we've all talked about the doo-doo around the Seahawks. They still have Zach Charbonnet there. What are we doing with this backfield? Are you dipping in? Charbonnet's obviously significantly cheaper. Are you going to do the thing where you're like, well, I don't want to pay up on Kenneth Walker when I can get Charbonnet cheaper, or it's just like I'd just rather have the good player, and maybe this new offensive coordinator isn't going to mess around with Charbonnet anymore?
Well, Kenneth Walker is explosive. He's a much bigger threat for a deep, long run. Touchdown. So every year he's giving you 8 to 9 touchdowns. Yards per carry dipped to 3.8 last year, but the receptions ticked up from, high 20s to 46 catches in only 11 games. So he was on pace to catch more than 60 passes. That to me is very encouraging. He was a top 12 running back in fantasy points per game, 16.5. So he actually had his career year in terms of efficiency and productivity. He just didn't deliver the big explosive plays. He did it just by being a solid all-purpose running back. He almost he had a very Zach Charbonnet-like season. If you think about it.
Ironically, yeah.
Yeah, he put in a primary back role. He did exactly what you would expect Zach Charbonnet to do, which is 16.5 fantasy points with finishing number 38 in explosive plays, the EPX metric we have on Player Profiler. That's Zach Charbonnet. Super solid, not that explosive, right? But he was elusive. He was elusive, but didn't have the big explosive plays. It was interesting. Like when you go to Player Profiler and you see the differential between the juke rate, the evaded tackles per touch, and the breakaway run rate, you see the players that had the widest disparity. Okay. I'd rather have the player with a high juke rate and the low breakaway run rate than the reverse. The breakaway run rate is much more randomized, whereas the juke rate is much more like, hey, are you making people miss in a vacuum or not? He was. Are you fast? Yes. We know he runs a 4.4. Has some of his explosiveness been sapped by these like groin injuries and abdominal and calf injuries? Yeah, I think he's not quite the same explosive player, but he's still very young. He still has juice. He's age 24, has the 97th percentile speed score. Things could break his way this year where he breaks some more long runs, still is commanding these catches. And without Metcalf and without Lockett, those vacated targets have to be filled by somebody. Now, is it going to be Cooper Kupp? No. My thesis is that Cooper Kupp is dust. He is ultra dust. I think that he's going to probably have a couple good games to start the season, but Cooper Kupp will be erased from the planet of football by the second half of next year. Who is going to pick up the slack? And if they're playing JSN more outside to accommodate Kupp, okay, and he's having success out there, they might leave him out there. They might play him more at Z. And then again, more opportunities open up underneath if Kupp sort of fades away as the season goes along. And that just means more opportunities in the passing game for Kenneth Walker, where he could absolutely post a 60-catch season. In the right circumstances, even a player like Carlos Hyde, not a strong pass catcher at Ohio State, not in a vacuum. You're going to go and run a swing pass to a running back. You're not going to pick Carlos Hyde out as the guy to run that play. And yet, he had a season in the NFL with 59 catches. This is very possible for Kenneth Walker, and that's why I think Kenneth Walker is a value there. I'd rather have Kenneth Walker than Isiah Pacheco. Isiah Pacheco
Easy.
is so much more vulnerable to the NFL draft. Like the asymmetricness of Pacheco is much higher than Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker has that Zach Charbonnet meat shield to protect him from the NFL draft. But again, it's really the RB3 that Seattle is going to be looking to upgrade in the draft, and they could accidentally push Zach Charbonnet to the RB3 spot because there's so many good players in this. Again, a DJ Giddens shows up and starts playing in camp and preseason. You're not allowed to be surprised when people look up and be like, oh, the guy they drafted, he's better than Zach Charbonnet. He's got more juice than Charbonnet. He looks a lot better than Charbonnet. It's like, yeah, well, Charbonnet is giving you like baseline production and he's super solid. But if he is your RB3, if they're an NFL team, that's a nice place to be. And that could be the spot they end up in. There's no way they're going to draft someone to replace Walker. Pacheco, way more vulnerable.
Pacheco is, you say he's vulnerable from the draft. He's vulnerable from Kareem Hunt. Like even when he came back from injury, Kareem Hunt was still eating away into his carries. Now we look fast forward in the offseason, they re-signed Kareem Hunt. I don't think it'd be crazy for them to draft in the first 3 rounds another running back. Then for Charbonnet, the best thing that could happen for him right now is Vegas to trade for him.
Oh my God! Think about what just happened to the Chiefs. They just got beat by a team that ostensibly the reason was Saquon Barkley.
Yes,
and
the trenches.
And their own defensive coordinator was like, we implemented the worst possible defensive strategy, which was we sold out to stop their running back, and whoops, it opened up
the passing game.
Jahan Dotson to beat us. Yep. It's like, yeah, dude, this is why you don't do that. You know, you don't do that. Please don't do that. Please don't sell out to stop the run ever as a defensive coordinator. Again, you've won championships and you've been in the league many years, and you know a lot more about the mechanics of calling a particular defensive package than I do. Okay, but what I do know is that you can get run over a lot faster in the Super Bowl through the air than on the ground.
Yes, you can.
I mean, that's pretty evident, and that's what happened. I'm not playing the result. That's something I've always believed and been saying for many, many years, and it's actually something I don't need to believe it. It's just true.
Yeah, statistically, it's just accurate.
It's just what it is. So so you can imagine them going into the draft going, we're in an arms race now for running back. You can imagine Kansas City having that disposition heading into the draft. So that's what makes Pacheco, to me, radioactive in fantasy football. Even a guy like Mixon and Kamara, even more than Mixon, more vulnerable than Kenneth Walker because there's no one behind them. There's no one behind Mixon, which means the Texans are identifying running back as a need area. Saints, same thing. They're going to go into the draft identifying running back as a need area. Hey, we're moving on from Jamal Williams. We need to get a running back to complement Alvin Kamara. You're going to hear that in the days and weeks ahead, which makes a lot of these running backs in this zone vulnerable, which will basically what it ends up doing is it throws me into the arms of a Kenneth Walker.
Yep. Pacheco.
And there's one final strategy aside I'll make in the Flex 4 game, especially in that situation, is instead of risking it all on a player with asymmetrical downside, I would prefer to put my chips on a running back with asymmetrical upside, and that would be any rookie. Mm-hmm. Any rookie in that remote area of ADP. So, for example, you could take a Pacheco, or you could just take a Marion Hampton. And then wherever he lands, he's going to become more valuable as soon as that certainty gets locked in and people can start making a projection. Right now, he has an empty sort of a forecasted projection Once Hampton and all these rookie running backs land, then all the fantasy analysts will be able to set more concrete projections, and they'll necessarily get bumped up a round or two unless they land very badly. But on average, they're going to land not badly.
I agree. I'm happy I'm here because, like, I feel like all season I've been gaslit or into thinking that I'm crazy because I said that Pacheco is way overrated. 1, 7th round pick. 2, not very good in any particular area. 3, they keep signing Kareem Hunt. 4, like you just said, everything that happened in the playoffs, in the Super Bowl. Here's your dad right now. It's a copycat league.
It's a copycat league.
Exactly. They're gonna go get a running back, guys. They're
going to
like,
get a running back, guys.
Yeah, I want my Saquon Barkley.
I want all my Saquon Barkley.
Yep. That was a free little nugget we're going to add to the sheet here on anti-Isiah Pacheco hate. I love it. We got 2 more. We got the Jaguars here. Evan Ingram's gone. Liam Cohen is in. How high are you on Brian Thomas Jr.? We actually forget Christian Kirk, who was only around for like an hour last season, if you consider his injury. He's gone as well, too. Brian Thomas Jr., is he closer to the wide receiver 5 than he is to like a wide receiver 10 at this point?
I think he and Malik Neighbors are right there. This is a very tricky spot, man. If you have, for Brian Thomas, very tricky. He could be like top 3, right? He could be right there with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. Puka Nacua now has competition from Devontae Adams for targets. Is it crazy to think that Brian Thomas would outproduce Puka Nacua? No.
No, it is not.
I would rather have Brian Thomas. Right? I would rather have Brian Thomas. Now we have Christian Kirk going to the Texans. Now it's the perfect skill match. We have Kirk to the Texans. He has been playing more and more slot. Eventually, it took the NFL like a decade to figure out that he should be playing the same slot rate that he did at Texas A&M. So we're finally getting to that point where last year he set another career high for slot rate, and all of C.J. Stroud's best games came with Stephon Diggs in the lineup playing slot. So they finally solved that problem, and that's gonna help C.J. Stroud. I think C.J. Stroud's a big winner from NFL Free Agency because of Christian Kirk. But it also is going to create more target dilution in that offense. So it in a vacuum, who's better? Brian Thomas is better than Nico Collins. So if you wanted to put Brian Thomas ahead of Nico Collins, ahead of Puka Nacua, ahead of Malik Neighbors, just because the quarterback situation is so uncertain. If you want to put Brian Thomas ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown, because Amon-Ra St. Brown is incredible in every way as one of these like slot flanker hybrid players, he still doesn't have the ability to win on the outside at X the way that Brian Thomas does. He doesn't quite have that Brian Thomas upside and versatility. Really, Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, like that's it. They're the only 2 players in the NFL that have that type of inside-outside, every quadrant versatility that Brian Thomas brings to the table with a competent quarterback. Again, that's what Malik Neighbors is missing. So you could easily build an argument that you would take Thomas over Neighbors, St. Brown, Collins, and Nacua, which then would mean it would be Chase, Jefferson, Lamb, and then after Lamb, you could easily imagine slotting in Brian Thomas as your wide receiver 4 in your projections.
My only pushback, because I'm a big BTJ guy. He's my guy on the website on here. I love Brian Thomas Jr. Okay. It stops at Puka Nacua for me. That's it. That's the only one who I wouldn't put him up ahead of, I think. And you know what? I don't have a statistical reason why. You know, it's just the same feeling with Jamar Chase there. When he's out there, the targets, especially with Stafford, he's the only one that I would not put above Brian. I wouldn't put Brian Thomas Jr. up. That's it. Malik Neighbors, I'm already there. And it's not about Malik Neighbors being bad or anything like that. He's obviously a Hall of Fame caliber player. He just right now only has Tommy DeVito, maybe Aaron Rodgers, and we've seen what that does. So that's about it. Is that crazy?
No, we're talking about a player who, as a rookie, commanded 133 targets.
What did Puka do as a rookie, though? That's just like the only reason why he didn't repeat that really last year is just injury. He was just out a bunch of the season.
Right.
Like that's it. And I see the line is very thin on there. It's just it's literally just a preference. I'd pick Puka Nacua and then BTJ right afterwards. But I mean,
BTJ also had an injury that sapped him for at least 6 weeks. He missed a bunch of games, or he played 17 games technically, but we know he wasn't right for a handful of those games. So if we go back and look, Indianapolis, he only played 63% of the snaps. In New England, week 7, 65% of the snaps. Green Bay, 50% of the snaps. So there was a period of time from like week 4 through week 8 where he was clearly not 100%, and then, or he wasn't playing at 100% of the snaps and wasn't running all the routes. They were slow playing him and easing him back into a full-time role. See, but then he didn't produce until week 11. So it's really from week 4 where he still put up 20 plus fantasy points. He just wasn't getting even a 75% snap share. And then all of a sudden, boom, he locks back in at the end of the season with Mac Jones and puts up a 32-point game, a 28-point game, a 24-point game. And he finally, for the first time in week 11, touches that 90% snap share threshold. So he wasn't even a full-time receiver until then, until week 11 or week 9, but he really wasn't a 100% healthy full-time receiver until at the earliest, at the earliest, you could say week 11. So now he's going to have Trevor Lawrence ideally for a full season, not a half
better
season.
Offensive coordinator.
He's going to have a better offensive coordinator. He is going to be a year of more refinement and health. He's going to be 22 years old. He was 21. He was a young rookie. There's no target competition there. They're going to draft somebody. Clearly, they again, just like these other teams, Jacksonville's going to go into the draft knowing that wide receiver is an area of need. However, it's not like anyone's going to really compete with Brian Thomas for targets. There's no one left. It's going to be the Brian Thomas show. So you have Trevor Lawrence with only Brian Thomas versus Matthew Stafford with Puka and Devontae Adams on any given play. And you really think that Brian Thomas is going to somehow get outproduced by Puka this year?
Puka did it with Cooper Kupp, and that's not even older Cooper Kupp. I'm just seeing the arguments there, Matt. It's not crazy.
And the argument is that Cooper Kupp is dust.
That's fair. Now he is dust, but like last year he was dust. But I'm talking about rookie year Puka Nacua. The peripherals are not that different from Brian Thomas Jr., and that's why, at least right now, to me, like the receivers I want right now: Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Puka Nacua, Brian Thomas Jr. That's my list, essentially. Even above Nico Collins there. I think those are the 4 alphas I want to walk out of any draft with. No matter the format.
I made a mistake. I should have identified Brian Thomas as one of my big winners from NFL Free Agency. I fucked up.
You did. Talking about Kenneth Gainwell instead of Brian Thomas Jr. and T. Higgins and Joe Burrow. But it's okay. It's okay.
Listen, man.
And I think
people subscribe to me on podcasts and social media because they know I'm going to touch on some deeper players.
Deep cuts.
I am going to highlight a few deep cuts, a Josh Downs, like going off the board. Really? Josh Downs, Jacoby Myers? Yeah, think about it. Big upgrade at quarterback and a great situation for Jacoby Myers. Josh Downs, there is a real case to be made that he is going to be an incredible value this year because Daniel Jones is going to be starting 5 to 7 games. And with Kenneth Gainwell, there is a real possibility. The reason I highlighted Gainwell, just for the record, Pittsburgh, in order to get DK Metcalf, had to trade their second-round pick, and that would have been a running back.
A running back, yeah. So
now there's not that many running back outs to Pittsburgh left on the board. It's a third rounder, and maybe they use a first rounder on running back. Maybe it's such an area of need, and this class is so good. Maybe they use their first rounder on Hampton. It's very possible. It could happen. I don't think that's likely. I haven't seen that mocked to Pittsburgh at all yet. So now we're talking really in with a little like more realism. Their third rounder has to be a running back, or Gainwell ends up being a big winner.
Yep.
Along with Jaylen Warren. But
that's actually a good argument.
Yeah. Well, my other point was, hey, he's not that different from Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren just happened to be sharing a field with Najee Harris, so we got a lot more opportunity, whereas Gainwell sharing a field with DeAndre Swift and Saquon Barkley the last couple of years. And that's a big difference in explosiveness that you're bringing to the table. Gainwell can't say, hey, I'm more explosive than the guy that you just signed to a big contract, whereas Harris is there in Pittsburgh, so Warren's like, hey guys, I'm like the ideal change of pace back. You should absolutely feed me more targets in the passing game than Harris. And they're like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Let's do that. Gainwell couldn't make that case in Philadelphia. So now it's more of a, hey, we're going to do a 1-for-1 competition, me against you. I was more athletic at the combine. I was more productive in college. You have that one season in the NFL where you commanded a bunch of targets. Let's go duke it out. Let's go see who the starter is in training camp. That's a great situation to be in for a running back that's essentially free in fantasy football.
I agree. And speaking of deep cut running backs, you have to think that Tank Bigsby was kind of one when you're talking about that word of upside. What are we doing now that Liam Cohen is there? Are we going to expect him to do kind of the same thing that they did with Tampa Bay with Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne? Is Travis Etienne dust now? Everyone seems to have given up on him. Right now, if you look at ADP for us, he's basically free. He's 68 right now, going after Chris Olave behind Najee Harris. This was a guy who was like a top 5 back for a lot of people.
Well, the interesting thing with the Flex 4 game and the same thing with the Origins game is once you get past player, let's say 48, 50, they stop becoming 100% owned. So once you get to, let's say, Brian Robinson, DK Metcalf, Tony Pollard, Chris Godwin, Jameson Williams, they're not 100% owned, right? So then the question is, am I drafting one of these guys that is, let's say, 66% owned? That's like Jameson Williams is the perfect example where what is the case for drafting Jameson Williams? Most teams have drafted him. His upside is capped by his inability to command targets. Why am I just in the mix with everybody else with Jameson Williams when I could go a little bit off the board and I could draft a receiver like a Jacoby Myers who's at 12% owned, or Ricky Pearsall who's at 14% owned, Jalen Waddle who's at 12. These guys are completely off the board and they give you leverage on the field. So once you get into round 5 and 6 on Fast Draft, you're going to start paying specific attention to the ownership, the tournament ownership, and it's posted right there in the draft room. When you're selecting a player next to their team, you see their tournament ownership. And so all else equal, you'd want a guy that's lower owned. Josh Downs has been drafted in 2.4% of drafts. That to me is a better value. There's a lot more upside because it gives you leverage than taking a guy that is 66% or 70% owned. So that's the interesting place where you're talking about where
diversity, like roster diversity.
Travis Etienne is 15% owned.
Mm-hmm.
And if he hits, if there's a renaissance there, because if you believe, and Liam Cohen, I don't believe offensive coordinators are the source of a renaissance, but if you believe that, then you might say, hey, Travis Etienne's a great upside pick here. Roma Dunze, maybe that's a great upside pick. He's at 21% owned. There's a lot of guys you could say are great upside picks. We talked about Pearsall. If things break Pearsall's way, if things break Josh Downs' way, they could really be nice picks. I think the best pick in round 6 last year was Chase Brown. Chase Brown was at something like 2% owned. Aaron Jones is at 4.8% owned. So there's probably someone like that you could circle in round 6 if you're not going to go with a rookie. Right now, a lot of these rookie running backs are still available in round 6. Travion Henderson, 33% owned. Quinshon Judkins, 52% owned. So anyone that's drafting in round 6 in these early drafts in the Flex 4 game, they'll probably have access to a Caleb Johnson, a Quinshon Judkins, or a Travion Henderson. And then, like I said, there's some of these receivers that are very low owned that things could break their way. So that when you're trying to decide, hey, am I going to push the button on a Travis Etienne? That is the decision matrix. Am I better off taking a shot on one of these wide receivers that everything could break their way? Am I better off taking a shot on a rookie running back with asymmetrical upside if they land well, or Travis Etienne and the probability that he can have a career renaissance with a full season of Trevor Lawrence and the new offensive coordinator? It's an interesting question. And that's why all these drafts are different. And that's why the game is so fun. And as talking to my buddy, we're talking about Texas Hold'em and marveling at how it's such a simple game. You just get 2 cards in your hand and there's 5 cards out there on the table at most. And that's it. It's always been 2 cards in your hand, 5 cards on the table. Nothing has changed about it. It's inherently a very simple card game. There's a lot of other more complex card games. And yet this might not be an exaggeration, literally 1,000,000x more content about that particular poker game than all the other poker games combined online.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about the Flex 4 game, just because you don't need to memorize the Week 17 schedule, just because you don't have to be so concerned with the exact build of the position allocations and all the complexities that have come with traditional best ball, doesn't mean there's not a lot of strategy involved. And especially in an early game that's been out for less than a year, you can go into that data section on the website. You can start to look at the ADPs and you can start to think about the builds, look back at the builds that were successful last year and get real leverage on the field. And the faster you start playing a game that's new, the more time you have to exploit it.
Yep. And that's a good place to stop, guys. Go over to Fast Draft, download our app. You can use my code Jagger. You can use FAST, which will be right here on the screen. Like, subscribe. If you guys have any questions, any trade advice, any questions about the app on Fast Draft, let me know. I'll be able to answer. As always, I'm Jagger May. With me is Matt Kelly. He'll be here sometimes. He's my boss, so I have to let him on whenever he wants to. Love you, and we'll see you on the next one.
So I thought I needed